Hello and welcome, everybody. We're continuing with our series on megatrends in missions. We've talked about the focus on the majority world before. We've talked about migration, and today's megatrend is going to be urbanization. So, what do we mean by that, or what do we want to look at? So, urbanization is the process of people increasingly moving from rural areas to urban areas, meaning that more and more people don't live in villages anymore, but in towns and cities. And so we'll talk about some general trends in urbanization today, and then think about a few implications this might have for missions. So the big picture is when we're talking about urbanization is that for the first time in human history, more people now live in urban rather than in rural areas. And if you live in a big city or if you have been reading these statistics for some time, it might not be like a big deal, but we have to remember that for most of human history, for a long time, most people were farmers, or maybe before they were hunters and gatherers, and that meant they lived in rural settings. And then, even as cities were being founded, as some people started to do commerce, and later we had in the Industrial Revolution factories that were set up, and even when people started to move to the cities to work in factories, it was still more of an exception to live in a city, and the norm was still basically to be a farmer and to live in the countryside. Um, and that has now shifted. In some countries, of course, it shifted a long time ago, but a few years ago, it shifted for the world as a whole. And so that's a very interesting stage that we now live in human history. So what we see here is a statistic about of the share of urban population worldwide in 2023 by continent. And so what we see here is that North America is heavily urban with 83%, and similarly Latin America and the Caribbean with 82%. And then Europe is also clearly mostly urban with 75%. So also Oceania, like the different islands in the Pacific Ocean, for example, with 68%. Uh, and then, yes, Africa is still slightly more rural, right? But that will change soon. So currently at 45% urban, but Asia is already over the half with 53%, and worldwide, and that is highlighted here in gray, right? While all the other columns are in blue, worldwide we are over 53% percent urban now. So here within urbanization, of course, there's different levels of urbanizations, right? So this heading here is that 20% of the world's population lives in a city with more than a million people. So and so that is also an interesting development that for much of human history, if a city had like 50,000 or 100,000 people, that was considered a big city, and that a city would reach a million people was very unusual. Nowadays, we have large cities that are like 1 to 5 million big, 5 to 10 million, even 10 million or more. And here we have a projection, right? So world population by size, class of settlement, comparing 2018 to 2030, which of course 2030 is still in the future. And so this is data from the United Nations from a document called World Cities Data Booklet. So urban in general percentage of worldwide population in the future will be at 60.4%. Um, and so then the number of cities that that will have over 10 million people will be growing, right? We will have dozens of cities that have 10 million people or 5 to 10 million people, hundreds of cities that have over a million um, people. And so a large percentage will live in cities that are 1 to 5 million, and then even larger percentage in will live in cities that are less than 500,000. So not everybody is going to live in a huge city. There will still be something special to live in a mega city of 5, 6, or maybe 10 or 20 million people. But again, it's important to be aware of those trends because some of those mega cities will be very influential, even beyond the number of people that they have. And so urbanization has a lot of implications in terms of development. Here's a report by the World Bank that explains that today, some 56% of the world's population, 4.4 billion inhabitants, live in cities. This trend is expected to continue with the urban population more than doubling its current size by 2050, at which point nearly 7 out of 10 people will live in cities. So again, before we had the projection to 2030, now we've got a projection to 2050. And again, it's not only about how many people live in which place, but it's also about the influence that those areas are going to have. And so here in the second column, we can read with more than 80% of global GDP generated in cities, urbanization can contribute to sustainable growth through increased productivity and innovation if managed well. So there's a lot of economic potential in cities, of course, but also a lot of problems, right? You have problems like environmental pollution, crime, overcrowding, things like that. So now, what does this all mean for missions? Implications for missions. So again, just talking about the big picture of things, missions about reaching people, right? So that's what it's all about. That's what we see in the life of Jesus, how he was always on the move to reach more people with his kingdom message, to touch people's lives. We see that in Paul's apostolic passion to go where Christ has not been proclaimed yet. And so for us in the 21st century, our call is the same, is to go uh, wherever the people are, and that has changed, right? And so the missiological consequence of urbanization is that as people increasingly live in cities, urban missions needs to increasingly become our priority, our goal, right? Whatever you wanna put there. And so part of the challenge with that, I believe, will be that many of the most maybe beloved or memorable mission stories that we know, or that maybe some of us grew up with reading the books, like The Shadow of the Almighty, The Life and Testament of Jim Elliot, right, by his wife Elizabeth Elliot. A lot of these famous missionary stories of the past, let's say of the 20th century, they took place um, in not in urban settings, sorry, not in urban settings, but in very rural settings, right? Not just maybe in a village, let's say, but in very remote parts of the globe, where only few people were living, where it was not densely populated at all. And so one famous American missionary in that regard is Jim Elliot, who lived from 1927 to 1956. So you can already see here from his lifespan that he died young. And so the story is that Jim Elliot and 4 other young men who traveled with him went to Ecuador to evangelize the Auca or Waodani, also known as the Huaorani tribe. And in that encounter, they died as martyrs because at that time, the the people in the tribe felt threatened and reacted very aggressively. He, meaning Jim Alias, is famous for this phrase that he wrote into his journal in 1949. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And another example would be this story here by Brucko. Uh, so as it says here in the subtitle of the book, or description of the book, the astonishing true story of a 19-year-old American. So he went out very, very young. His capture by the Motilone Indians and his adventures in Christianizing the Stone Age. Um, so this is a story of a man called Bruce Olson, who moved to Colombia to live with the Motilone tribe beginning in 1961. So again, it's a story of the 20th century, right? Roughly in the middle of the 20th century. It's again a story in South America, and it's a story in a very rural and remote setting. Sorry about my box here. Cut this off as I was enlarging the font size. And a third example, here we've got the story of Peace Child, described by Don Richardson. And so the description is that in 1962, Don and his wife Carol Richardson risked their lives to share the gospel with the Sawi people of New Guinea. So now we're not in South America anymore. But rather in Asia, more specifically in Southeast Asia. But again, very rural setting, very remote, right? We're talking about these fascinating missionary stories where missionaries start interactions with tribes that didn't have any contact with the outside world, tribes that were sometimes headhunting tribes, tribes that were cannibals, and sometimes, as also in the case here of this story, there's an amazing revival took place as those people turned to the Lord, and sometimes you have entire villages and large percentages of the tribe becoming Christians over time. Um, so they were not U.S. American missionaries, but from Canada, and they moved there with their baby boy Steve. And interestingly, in 1999, Steve Richardson became the president of the missions agency Pioneers, which you can read about on their website. So it's an amazing heritage that Don and Carter Richardson had in their own life, in their own ministry, and then also through their children, and specifically with Steve continuing to have such a prominent role in the missions world. Um, Now, with that, missiological implications, and here's some pictures of large cities of our day and age. One is that missionaries or future missionaries need to envision living and ministering in cities, right? So for some missionaries, this might be good news. Maybe they don't see themselves in a village. Maybe they don't see themselves working with a remote tribe somewhere in the rainforest or somewhere on a faraway mountain range where you have no access to healthcare, to educational opportunities, things like that. So for them, it could be good news, could be an encouragement to say, yeah, if you feel more comfortable or more, you can feel like you can be more effective in a urban setting by living in a city. There's opportunities. Definitely can be a missionary in a city in the 21st century in a way that just wasn't the case, maybe in the same way 100 or 200 years ago. Um, and for some and people, it might be an adjustment, right? Maybe some people have been missionaries in a rural setting for a long time, and it would be a big adjustment for them to move into a city. Or maybe somebody's thinking about becoming a missionary, and they are like, "Oh, I'm just picturing myself, somewhere in the rainforest, and then living in a hut there." And that's always what I pictured as a missionary. And then living in a big city, especially if it's very large, like a large city like Mexico City in Mexico, or Manila in the Philippines, or Bangkok in Thailand, or New Delhi in India, and that can be quite a challenge. And in those cities, we do encounter a lot of complex issues, such as poverty, right? Widespread poverty in a lot of these cities. There's large segments of the population living in slums. There's crime. There are environmental problems and concerns that need to be addressed. And again, physiologically speaking, uh, those are our challenges, and we should lament that people live in those circumstances. At the same time, it's also a great opportunity to reach people with the gospel, to make a difference, right? Whether that's through mercy ministries or through caring for the environment, or addressing other issues as part of the missional enterprise. Also, urban missions create opportunities to reach out to a variety of groups. And you can look at it in different ways, right? Obviously, demographics. You could reach out to children in a city, or to young people, or to married people, or to retired and old people. But especially and related to another topic we've talked about, migration. In a city, you often have a large number of different ethnicities coming together, right? You have people who have maybe come from other countries who are now immigrants in that city. You might have people from rural areas who have moved into the cities because they are looking for greater opportunities, especially for the next generation, for their children. And so you might be able to reach out to populations that otherwise would be very difficult to reach. And lastly, if you have a missiological missional vision to impact all areas of society, meaning that you're not just passionate about evangelism and church planting, let's say, but you're also passionate about making a difference in the business world. You're passionate about politics, you're passionate about the arts and entertainment. If you have that kind of vision to impact different spheres of society, then the city is the place to be. Because often in cities, it's for example where where businesses are flourishing, where large companies have their headquarters. When it comes to politics, if you're talking national politics, most of that is happening in the capital of a country. And while in the US, Washington, D.C. is not that large of a city in terms of its population, but in a lot of countries around the world, the capital cities are very large. For example, Tokyo in Japan, or Beijing in China, Mexico City, we already mentioned. And so certainly if you want to have an influence in those areas, you need to be in a city. Maybe you need to be specifically in a very large city, or even in the cities in the nation's capital. And that the same would be true for entertainment. If you're looking at where are the big publishing houses, where the influential conferences that take place, where's the film industry, all those kind of things. If a country has that, it will usually take place in its largest city, or one of its larger cities. And so, with that, I want to thank you for your interest. Feel free to comment on this video, and also to reach me by email at danieltopf@fuller.edu. The website there, worldteam.org, is the agency that I work with, and yeah, it's a change that we are also seeing within the World Team. Actually, the story of Peace Child by Don Richardson, he went out with RBMU, Regions Beyond Missionary Union, which later merged with another agency to become World Team. So the Peace Child story is very much part of our heritage. And we still have work in very remote parts of the globe, in rural areas, for example, in Cameroon, in Africa, in Papua and Indonesia. But at the same time, a lot of our new initiatives are taking place in large cities. So we as Well Team are experiencing that change as well. I would love to interact with you on that topic. And with that, I want to say I appreciate your interest in missions, and I hope to talk to you next time as well.